Hello everyone, I'm Meg Bruner with the Northwest ATTC, and this is a new recording of a webinar we delivered last week live that failed to record. Our presenter, Dennis Donovan, has kindly agreed to redo it so we can get this archived video, so thank you, Dennis. Dr. Donovan is director of the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute at the University of Washington and also a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the UW School of Medicine. He has over 30 years of clinical and research experience in the field of substance abuse prevention and treatment, and also has considerable experience working on issues of substance use and behavioral health in American Indian and Alaska Native communities. Today, Dr. Donovan is going to be talking about the healing of the canoe, a strengths-based life skills curriculum for tribal youth. So take it away, Dr. Donovan.
Thank you, Meg. So I'm glad to be able to do this, and hopefully we'll have this archived and people can really learn much more about the Healing of the Canoe project. So just again to reiterate, that's me. I am who I am. And I've been here at the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute for 25 years now, and one of the areas that I've worked with considerably across that time is issues around American Indian and Alaskan Natives and substance use and behavioral health issues. So the Healing of the Canoe project sort of emerges out of that backdrop. One of the things that is the case is that this was a project that was developed initially and was funded by a grant working with the Suquamish Tribe and the Port Gamble S'Klallam Tribe, both of which are located on Kitsap Peninsula across the bay from Seattle, and the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute here at the University of Washington. More recently, it's become one of the offerings of the Northwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center, and they're sponsoring this webinar as well as sponsoring a number of available trainings and technical assistance opportunities. So I think it's important to keep in mind that research in Native communities has often been met with some degree of concern and suspicion about the sort of merits and maybe the rationale behind it. And in the past, there have been episodes of research that really have been harmful in nature to tribal communities. And when we began this project, we met and had a retreat with elders from the Suquamish Tribe. And there are two things that sort of echo in my mind from that meeting. The first one was an elder looking at those of us from the university and saying, your job today is to sit and listen. If you talk, you tell me what it is that you know. But if you listen, you hear what it is we want and we need. And that really became an important part of the foundation for our Healing of the Canoe project. And the other statement is here on the slide. At the beginning of this project, that same elder had said, if the research you are proposing to do doesn't benefit the community, then it's really not worth doing here. And I think that's the important piece, that this was a project that had as its goal helping and working with collaboratively the community to address an issue of concern that they themselves had identified, and in fact had invited us from the university to come in and help them develop opportunities to address it more successfully and effectively. So what is the Healing of the Canoe? First of all, I want to tell you that you don't have to have a canoe to use this intervention, and that many of the tribal communities that we have trained have very little insight into the meaning or what a canoe looks like. Many of them are interior plains level tribes. So the Healing of the Canoe, as stated here, it uses the traditional canoe journey as a heuristic and metaphor that really tries to provide tribal youth the skills they need to travel their life's journey without being pulled off course by alcohol or drugs. And it does so by using tribal values, traditions, and culture as a compass to guide them, to provide them direction, and an anchor to ground them, to help stabilize them in their life. Many tribes have chosen metaphors that really fit their context, and that's one of the things that I want to stress about what we'll be talking about today, that We'll talk about the healing of the canoe curricula that have been developed, but we've developed it in such a way to allow it to be extremely flexible and adaptable to fit the context of the tribal communities with which you might be working. So I want to show a video of what the healing of the
Suquamish
canoe
creation
is.
stories tell us that the canoe is a gift from the Creator. After creating the earth and everything in it, the Creator saw the people at the shore, unable to catch the fish swimming under the surface, or visit their relatives on the other side of the Puget Sound. At first, the Creator tried using a salmon and a whale, but neither could carry the people and get them where they needed to go. Then the Creator saw a deer walk from the woods to the shore, lift her head up high, and enter the water to swim in a straight line all the way to the other side. The Creator turned the deer into a canoe for the people. And this is why our canoes have the deer head bow. The Creator taught them how to use it, how to pull their paddles through the water together to make traveling great distances easier. Ever since, the canoe has been used to travel the waterways, for fishing and hunting, weddings and funerals, potlatches, name-giving ceremonies, everything. The canoe symbolizes and embodies Pacific Northwest culture. The canoe is literally and figuratively carrying our teachings. How to pull together, the importance of balance, how to look out for one another, how to relate to other tribes and our surroundings. Today, many Native American communities have some devastating obstacles to overcome. The healing of the canoe was created to address these obstacles using our greatest strength, our cultural teachings. The healing of the canoe is a collaboration between the Suquamish Tribe, the Port Gamble-Sklallam Tribe, and the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute at the University of Washington. We chose to focus on our young people. Working with tribal members and elders, we developed a curriculum that teaches the canoe journey as a metaphor for life. The Holding Up Our Youth curriculum is full of cultural teachings, relying heavily on community members and elders as guest mentors. The curriculum also teaches culturally grounded life skills and knowledge of the body when drugs and alcohol are abused. Using community-based and tribal participatory research methods, we have proven that our curriculum increased youth's connection to community and decreased youth substance abuse. With learning our culture and teachings, we build community. As we learn about canoes and tribal journeys, our community learns to pull together. We chose the name, The Healing of the Canoe, because of the healing that the canoe brings to the community.
So I hope that gives you a sense about the healing of the canoe as a method by which one can use culture and tradition and values of one's tribe or tribal community as a means of trying to address a number of problem issues, and in this particular instance, substance use among youth. I want to go through and give you a sense of the background and a brief history of how this project came about, because I think it's an instructive one, and it really helps to understand sort of where it began and why we believe it to be an important process in addition to the curricula that have been developed. The process itself is an important one that other communities can follow. So it is a project that was originally begun when the then director of the Suquamish Wellness Program came and met with Lisa Ray Thomas, who at the time was a postdoctoral fellow here at the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute, and she's also an Alaskan native. And the director of the wellness program said, we have a problem in our community with youth turning increasingly to alcohol and drugs. And is there a way we can partner with the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute and the university to somehow work together collaboratively to address that problem? So we began that process, and as I said, the first meeting was really a retreat with elders in which we were provided that frame of reference of it needing to be research that would benefit the community, and we had to listen to the needs and the wants and the desires of the community. And so as we were doing that preparatory work, the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities sent out a call for proposals that would look at funding projects that would be using community-based participatory research approaches. And we thought, gosh, that sounds like what we're doing. And so we applied. And it turned out that we were fortunate enough to be one of 25 projects that were funded under this broad umbrella of community-based participatory research. Only one of 3 that dealt with issues having to do with Alaska Natives or American Indians. And in that grant process, the grant structure was set up in advance to have 3 phases, each of which required competing to go on from one to the next. So in phase 1, really the focus was on developing a working relationship with the community, doing a needs and strengths and resources assessment. One of the things that often has been a problem and tribal communities have raised concerns about is that many times academics will come into the community and they will do some kind of research that points to a problem, and it's problem focused, and yet often there's no focus on the strengths that are inherent in and part and parcel of the community itself. And we felt it extremely important to see both sides of that coin, to look at what are the needs, but also what are the resources that are available in and among the community members and the structure of the community itself. We also did, as would be appropriate, literature review, and we began to develop a curriculum that really was piloted. And it was done in such a way that we needed to have the tribal council's approval to move forward. They designated a community advisory board. It's called the Cultural Co-op, which was given the responsibilities by the tribal council to assure that any program coming into the community was adherent to and was not in conflict with the tribe's culture and values. So we did that. We worked through that first phase, and at the end of that, if you had some kind of a curriculum that seemed to be reasonable and maybe showed some promise, although not tested fully, you could compete for the next phase. Phase 1 was 3 years, so we had 3 years to work in that partnership development, in that developmental phase. We were fortunate enough to compete successfully for phase 2, which was then 5 years. And as part of that, what we wanted to do was to more fully establish the curricula that we were developing. We wanted to make sure that it was something that the community itself could see as its own and take some ownership of. We wanted to make sure that it was addressing the needs of the community. And so we would look at it and would do focus groups. And we did focus groups with elders, with youth, with community members, and with tribal key stakeholders, people in leadership capacity, to assure that what we were doing fit the bill for addressing this concern they had. One of the things that had come out in our needs and strengths assessment was that, in fact, substance abuse among youth rose to the top once again. But what was there that we had not anticipated and became crucial to us, in particular from the elders, was that there was a strong belief that the move toward increased use of alcohol and drugs was because the youth were drifting away from their tribal values and culture. And so the strong expectation was, in order to address that alcohol and drug use meaningfully, it had to be done in such a way that would bring youth back to that strength base of culture and tradition and values. So we in fact were able to do that. But what in phase 2 we wanted to make sure of was that it just didn't happen and focus only on the Suquamish Tribe. They were our partners to begin with, but we wanted to show that the process and the outcome would be generalizable to other tribes. So we expanded in phase 2 to move to Port Gamble Sklallam, which by car is only about 12 to 15 miles away from Suquamish. By canoe, it's 29 miles. And they're quite different settings. They have actually different native languages. They are very different reservations. And so we felt as if we were able to move from Suquamish to Port Gamble and replicate how it was we did things in the process, and they were also able to come up with a curriculum that addressed their concerns, we would have something that we could ultimately disseminate more broadly. So we were able to do that. We were able to establish a similar comparable process and a comparable manual and curriculum in both of these two tribal settings. And we began to evaluate the curriculum itself. And what we found was, in a fairly small sample, that individuals who were going through these curricula, compared to those that had not yet gotten to go through them, they demonstrated an increase in their sense of connectedness to their tribe and their tribal values and traditions and activities within the tribal system. They also showed a reduction or the lack of initiation of substance use. And also, something that we didn't anticipate initially was that they showed a greater sense of future hope and optimism, which becomes important later on because that future hope and optimism represents the counterpart to a sense of hopelessness and suicidality. So we were able to implement and evaluate the curricula, and because of that, we were then able to move to the third phase competitively. We received a grant for the third phase. Phase 2 was 5 years, phase 3 was 3. And in that, it was a process of then taking what we had learned, taking the curricula that we had developed and had evaluated successfully, and beginning to disseminate it. But given that it had been established with those two tribes, and because information in those two curricula that each of them had developed was tribally specific, we needed to figure out a way to be able to implement something that could be adaptable. And so in doing so, we since have developed a generic template curriculum that has placeholders for communities to insert their own ideas, their own tribal values, stories, traditions, and so on, while at the same time maintaining the social skills that are evidence-based. So that's basically a brief history. Again, I think the important part is how it was we also went about doing this business. It was using a tribal academic partnership. And as I said, we were invited in to help address a problem. So that's always, I think, an important part, that we had been invited, and also some of us were known to the communities. And so there was a sense of what's called proxy trust, that there were people who could vouch for us as being respectful and willing to work collaboratively, and that we wouldn't be coming in sort of doing what's often been described as helicopter research, where you fly in, drop down, grab the data, and fly off. We were making a strong and long-term commitment to the communities with which we would be working. We use community-based and tribally based participatory research methods. We hired people in each of the communities to serve as leaders in those communities of the implementation of these curricula. We tried to do the things we needed to make the communities aware of what we were doing. We would hold periodic community meetings. We would publish articles in the tribal newsletters and so on. And basically, part of what we were doing was to focus on the strengths of the community, that it was they who knew the most about what they needed, and they also knew many of the ways in which they needed to go about trying to address their concerns. And as we were doing this, we began thinking about how is it and what is it we could do to draw youth back to their tribal tradition and culture. There was also a strong cultural resurgence ongoing along what's called the Salish coast, the coastline that goes sort of from the interior waters of Puget Sound up into British Columbia to Southeast Alaska. And that really was the development of and reinstitution really of a tribal canoe journey, that these canoe journeys would happen annually. They would basically have a destination that all the canoes would be moving toward. And along the way, each of the tribes along the way would serve as a host in the journey. And during that hosting, there would be singing and dancing and drumming and the sharing of gifts, much like a potlatch. And it's a way in which cultural activities would seem to become part and parcel of their everyday journey in life. An important part of the journey as well is that in the canoe journey, it's meant to be a period of being free of alcohol and drugs. So it seemed to be a great vehicle, literally and figuratively, for us to look at as something that would bring youth back to a cultural rejuvenation and a tie back to their own tribes and their culture. And as this quote really points to, is that the journey is an opportunity to teach prevention through our culture. It brings self-esteem and it reminds us all of where we have come from. And I think one of the things that's an underpinning of this approach is a strong belief with evidence that culture can be both preventive and curative. And so we really see this as an important part of a larger pattern toward wellness. And also at the same time, we here at the university had colleagues who had been working with the Seattle Indian Health Board to look at youth substance use. But now, within the health board system, this was an urban Indian setting with multiple tribes being represented as opposed to a single tribe. There had been a manual developed and implemented within the Seattle Indian Health Board, and we really began looking at it as the model rather than trying to reconstruct a new way of approaching this. We said, let's take this manual and let's see how it can be adapted from an urban setting, multiple pan-Indian approach to now make it specific to a given tribe. So we took this as sort of our starting point. And with the use of community advisory boards and community adaptation committees, we moved toward personalizing and specifying it to a given tribal community. The process looks complicated, but it really isn't. The thing that really needs to be pointed out here is that it was an iterative process, that it wasn't just us from the university saying, here's the solution to your problem. Rather, it was working together, looking at what the opportunities were and what the options were to us, what things were currently available that were culturally relevant and specific, if any, and then working together as teams to begin developing a curriculum and then going back and forth between our community advisory board and our teams from the university and within the tribal communities until finally we could present it to tribal council and they could say, we believe this to be an important document and we support its implementation in our tribes. So the process of community-based participatory research is one where, in fact, there's equal say along the way. We had in each of the communities in Suquamish and Port Gamble-Squalum, individuals who were the principal investigators of subcontracts with the university, so that they really were the leaders within their community. They were the ones who worked most closely with the community advisory boards and so on. But we all met together as a larger team as well. And through that process in Suquamish, we came up with the Holding Up Our Youth curriculum. And as is pointed out, it's the community pulling together. One of the things that Meg didn't mention about me as she did the introduction is I'm someone who tells puns, and double meaning often is something that's important to me. And in fact, the community pulling together, again, is literally in a canoe, you pull. You don't paddle, you pull. And it's the community pulling together much more from the sense of cohesion in approaching a problem. So the Holding Up Our Youth curriculum was initially developed as an 11-session prevention program, plus there was an honoring ceremony at the end of it that really tries to incorporate evidence-based components, social skills, and healthy youth development skills, along with indigenous knowledge and tradition and values. As I mentioned, one of the things that we found in our evaluation was that youth who had gone through this curriculum had a high sense of future hope and optimism. That was noticed by the Thrive Project, which is a suicide prevention project and program as part of the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. And the Thrive Project worked with us and helped support us to develop 2 suicide prevention modules that we subsequently added into the curriculum, so that now the base, the generic curriculum is 13 sessions plus the honoring ceremony. The honoring ceremony is really quite important too. One of the things that youth often do is, as part of the curriculum, develop digital stories about something meaningful to them in their own struggles or in their own life or their own successes. And one of the things that takes place at the honoring ceremony is, in addition to them gifting important people in their lives and their mentors, they often will show the digital stories they've done. And there's typically not a dry eye in the audience. They're so powerful and so meaningful. So again, the intent and the purpose of the Healing of the Canoe project and the curricula that come out of it is to provide the youth those skills they need in order to make their life's journey meaningful and without harm, without being pulled off course by alcohol or drugs, using that tradition and value and culture of their tribal communities as both that compass to guide them and an anchor to ground them. And really, as it says here, the focus is really trying to blend these tribal traditions, culture and values, and indigenous knowledge with evidence-based practices. So the skills that are embedded and are consistent across all of the curricula, be it those developed by Suquamish or by Port Gamble Sklallam, or are found in the generic template, all of those are ones that demonstrate effectiveness in working with youth around substance use. And it's then those that are integrated with the tribal traditions and values. So it really is this blending together. And this is something that one of the youth that we originally had hired as a youth liaison had put together, sort of depicting it from a much more naturalistic way than our typical logic models would look. But it really is the case that we firmly believe that the deeper the roots, the more strongly one is embedded in culture, the stronger are the branches. And that is that they can function much more effectively as individuals if they have that deep root. So this is a listing of the curriculum chapters. I don't believe it includes, it does include the suicide ones. I'm not going to go over these individually, but you can see that it's in fact a way of looking at these potential topic areas from a cultural lens that really I think is important. And one of the things that's nice about this too is that we take advantage of one of the strengths identified in our needs and strengths assessment, and that is that there are many people in the community who represent culture bearers, who can serve as mentors and guest speakers and so on. And so to the extent that we make opportunities for them, they often are more than happy to come in and share with the youth about their own experiences, whatever that might be, and how it's relevant to the journey that the youth might be going on. This is a list of the actual life skills that are included. And as you look at these, you'll see that many of these are ones that you would anticipate finding in any kind of sort of behavioral or cognitive behavioral approach to prevention or to intervention. It's a sense of oneself, self-awareness. Who am I? And what are my strengths and what are my limitations? Who do I see myself and how are others maybe seeing me? In the tribal communities, youth often have to deal with microaggressions and issues of stereotypes about Indians and so on. And so how is it they can recognize that? How can they stand up against those stereotypes? How do they deal with it if they experience it? How can they get help from one's community? We actually have a sort of a game in which people have to follow sort of the, go to a particular site and then they get a clue about where they need to go next, about where would you go to get help looking for a job, where would you go to try to find help looking for academic support or trying to get into college, where would you go if you needed to find good clothes to go on a job interview, so that they actually would go and do sort of the scavenger hunt, if you will, of these resources in the community. As I said, mentoring is important. We have youth or elders that will come in and mentor the youth, but the other is for the youth begin to assume some roles of responsibility and leadership within their own community and try to begin mentoring others that are below them in age or experience. How do you cope with negative emotions? How do you set goals for yourself? How do you solve problems when they come up? How do you listen? This was one of the things that one of the elders said. Before you can really talk about effective communication, you have to have people understand what it's like to listen. And it goes back to that story I mentioned at the beginning, when the elder told me and the others from the university that our job was to sit and listen, because only then can we understand what the needs are and the desires are of other people or other communities. How do you deal with the consequences and minimize the consequences of substance use? And then ultimately, how is it you take on leadership roles and responsibilities to serve your community? And again, our youth liaison put it, I think, in a much nicer, culturally context way. As you can see here, these represent the skills as well as a number of the specific titles of the curriculum chapters and modules. So we started on the right-hand side, having developed the holding up our youth curriculum in the Suquamish Tribe through the generalization and replication process in Port Gamble S'Klallam. The S'Klallam tribe developed its own version of this curriculum, the Navigating Life the S'Klallam Way. So we moved from one to the next. We showed that we can generalize the process and the outcome. And then we really started to think about how is it we can disseminate this to a broader context, a broader range of individual tribes or tribal organizations. And the way in which we've chosen to do it is to develop this generic curriculum template. We call it the Culturally Grounded Life Skills for Youth. And we say that because it is culturally grounded, it provides life skills, and it targets youth. And its focus, again, is primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on alcohol and drug and other substances of abuse. It also now includes those modules I mentioned about suicide risk and risk prevention. It is a process that provides an opportunity to adapt and implement. So in addition to making available the actual generic template, there is a curriculum training manual that has all of the materials that you would want and need. It tells you how you engage your community. It talks about how you can do stakeholder interviews and focus groups. It provides you all of the information that you might have interest in using in trying to develop this, adapt it, and implement it into your own communities. And it includes the participant handouts. As I said, one of the things that's important and is nice about this curriculum is that you can adapt it to serve as your own journey, whatever that might be for your youth. So as an example, as I mentioned, there are some places that we've done trainings or people that we've trained for whom a seagoing canoe has little meaning. An example of that is a group of Métis individuals from Alberta, Canada, for whom a seagoing canoe has no meaning. But what they talked about in a story about their tribal setting was that their ancestors were buffalo hunters, and they would hunt buffalo on the plains. And when they would get an animal, they would kill the buffalo. They would put its carcass onto a little cart, a horse-drawn, animal-drawn cart, and they would bring it back to the village. And so their metaphor became the journey of the little red cart. Another tribe with which we've worked on the coast in Washington State are whale hunters traditionally. And so the journey for them is preparing for the whale hunt. Others have looked at it as the transition and the journey toward adulthood. So it's really quite adaptable and flexible, and you can work toward coming up with a metaphor that fits the context of your community. So as it says here, you can determine your own metaphor, and you can integrate your own traditions and culture and values, language and ceremonial activities into this generic template. And I think that's the thing that the people that we've trained have found most useful, is that it's not necessarily, although it can be used as a take it off the shelf and adapt it as is, but more importantly, they can make it their own in the same way that both Suquamish and Port Gamble were able to do so. I like this picture. One of our staff members, the Healing of the Canoe staff members, had been in a community where we had done training, excuse me, and where there had been a significant implementation of this, and she saw a youth wearing this t-shirt and couldn't resist taking a picture, and I'm so glad that she did, because it really demonstrates sort of the way in which communities have have taken this on their own and made it their own. So the curriculum is highly adaptable. It can be adapted across venues. So in the course of its development and subsequent to that, it's been used in summer schools. Excuse me as I take a swig of water here to clear my throat. It's been used as after school and during school. It's been used outside of a school or educational context in special summer camps or culture camps that many tribes put on. We did it both in Suquamish and Port Gamble Sklallam as a series of 3 2.5-day long intensive retreats separated by about a month each. And that's been adapted into wellness programs to focus both on alcohol as well as behavioral health issues among not only youth but also adults. So it can be adapted across age groups from middle school, high school, young adults, and it's adaptable across target groups. So it can be used for prevention, and that could be general prevention, sort of universal prevention, or it could be selective targeted prevention, or it could be used in treatment. So there are a number of training options that have been developed and used across time. So it's been used where we've done trainings for individual tribes and tribal communities, often where we've been invited to come to their setting and sites and to meet people in their community as well as to do the training. Or it can be a multiple tribe training program or workshop, which is one of the ways in which we've done it oftentimes in the past as well. But during the course of that day and a half or 2-day training, it's possible to break into your own subgroups. We've done training in person, we've done webinars, technical assistance in person or webinars or phone. We've done it at individual levels and organizational, like programmatic levels, and tribal levels. That technical assistance really is to help support a group that has been trained initially in one of these workshops to subsequently go back to their communities and to figure out how they will best adapt to make this curriculum their own, and how they, once having done that, will implement it into their particular venues, whatever that might be. We can provide ongoing involvement in learning collaboratives of shared experiences. As an example, there are a number of schools, both tribal schools as well as public schools, that have developed ways in which they've integrated these curricula into what it is they do. And as a result, They're able to learn from one another about the barriers to and the facilitators of implementation. We can provide and have done so booster sessions for tribal communities that have been previously trained. And in the past, we've been happy to serve as consultants for communities that are seeking grant funding to help support and sustain the Healing of the Canoe curriculum in their system. So we really think it's important to not just learn about this for the short term, but if it's something that you find to be useful, to figure out ways in which you can sustain it across time. And ways in which places that we've done it have been able to do so is some have gotten federal grants, some have gotten county level grants, some have incorporated it into their school curriculum. Actually, when we were working initially in Suquamish, not only were they able to put it into their tribal high school, they were also able to get running start credit from a local community college. So there are a number of ways in which that can happen. So we can provide this training and technical assistance to help you do a variety of things. You know, we can help with the needs and resources and strengths and readiness assessments. We can talk about ways in which you can target specific issues of concern in addition to alcohol and drugs. We can help develop that sense of what the journey metaphor fits, you know, how it would best fit you and your needs and your tribal community or organization. We can help with the adaptation process, how you engage community members to be active contributors, both maybe at the beginning and adaptation phase, as well as mentors and as speakers who are willing to come in and share their experience and knowledge and cultural history. So think about those things as opportunities that can be made available to you through the Healing of the Canoe trainings and subsequent technical assistance approaches. As of October, when we actually first did one of our trainings for the Northwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center, we had trained 350 attendees from 46 different tribes and 14 tribal organizations. And despite the fact that the Northwest ATTC focuses on Region 10, which is Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Idaho, before that we were training folks from a variety of different settings that included people coming from as far away as upstate New York and the Upper Peninsula and Michigan, across a few from the Dakotas and in Montana. So, you know, we've had spread, but the bulk of the folks we've trained have come from the 4 states in Region 10. Again, so from Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Idaho. I thought this was an important and meaningful, heartfelt statement by someone that was going to be coming to a training but had learned much about it through a variety of sources. So she says, thanks, and thanks for an amazing curriculum. I love it. So creative, relevant, and life-saving. I visited a client in juvenile justice system, a couple of days ago and told her about it. And she said, and I love this part, in parentheses, I'm not making this up. She said, finally, someone is doing something to help us. I'm looking forward to the training, Laura. The trainings that we've done have been seen as quite positive. They've seen, the people who have gone through have seen it as extremely resourceful, as targeting and implementing culture, as focusing on healing. And as you can see from these wordles, they really are seen positively by folks who have gone through the trainings. We did the first of our NWATTC trainings in October over in Spokane in Eastern Washington. You can see here the group that we had. It was a fun couple of days. We had people from, again, from Alaska, from Idaho. We actually had all 4 of the states from Region 10 represented. And at the bottom left is the wordle that came out of our working with that group. So that is what the Healing of the Canoe is, where it came from, where it's been and where it's going. And I think what's of interest is, again, going back to a comment that an elder made at the end of our working at one point with the healing of the canoe in a particular community. And the quotation is here: "We told them what we needed them to do, and then they did it." And I think that's a credit to our team. It's a credit to the many communities that have helped shape this curriculum and its adaptation and implementation. And we make it available to you as part of the Northwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center. So I appreciate your time, and I do hope that you find this useful, and we're more than happy to talk with any of you who have questions about the healing of the canoe, and also know that materials are available at no cost through a website that's called Healthy Native Youth, which is part of the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. So it's Healthy Native Youth. So I think there will be a link available to you that will give that information as well. So thank you again for your time and your attention, and I hope you find this useful and valuable to you.
Thank you, Dennis.